But it also means that there are investors who prefer certain products. So we're happy to be able to offer that. So we are that government agency that is not just inward-looking. We have a lot of interface with several stakeholders, and I can see some of them here. Certainly the National Pension Commission is here, and I don't know who else has been invited here. So we have a number of stakeholders that we work with, including the press. I can see a number of them here as well. Okay, so today's event is not so much about the macroeconomy. So typically when the DMO has a roadshow, we talk about depending on what it is, we talk about the political environment, because investors like to know that, especially when we're meeting with international investors. But we know that all investors will also like to know about the macroeconomy anyway, because if you're investing in a security, you want to know the ability or the capacity of the borrower to repay that security. So we won't talk. So we'll typically have several slides on the economy, but today's event, because of the nature of the product, has been focused largely on technical issues around green bonds, as well as, I think, the transaction summary. So we'll talk in terms of the macroeconomy. I think it's a good time for us, sitting on this side of the hall, to be able to come back to you to say, things have improved for Nigeria. The indicators are not only better, but are getting better. If we speak about inflation, for instance, so what are those indicators? We know there was a point inflation was 18.52%, which was extremely high, but it's come down steadily since then. The last figure we have is 15.91%. So that means our monies are better preserved because inflation is coming down. We know what had also happened to the external reserves. I mean, that dropped to less than 30 billion. I think probably less than 25 billion US dollars at some point. But as we speak, it's been going up again steadily. And that means the government does have sufficient, more than sufficient reserves, not only for imports, but also to support the Naira, and which had been a critical issue, I think, for 2 years ago. We knew what had happened to the local currency. You couldn't predict what it would be. Apart from a rapid depreciation, you almost couldn't predict what it would be. And then supply was not readily available. We've come a long way from that. You can sit down now and plan, what the exchange rate is. It is stable, and you can access foreign currency when you need it. So certainly the fundamentals of the Nigerian economy are good, but let me not miss the fact that we're also out of recession. We've been out now 2 quarters, so we're on the path towards recovery. And all these are good indications that Nigeria is improving, the economy is growing, all the indices are improving. It's an indication of an ability of the government to meet its obligations. We also shouldn't forget that the government is not only relying on those indices growing, we are aggressively pursuing revenues. So if I may speak on behalf of the Honorable Minister, if you have not been paying taxes or paying the right taxes, remember the voluntary assets and income declaration. It is just all to make sure there's more revenue and the government is able to provide the services that the people, citizens expect it to provide. So on the economy, things are certainly looking up. And on the debt management side, it is true that we borrow, but there is a strategy around that borrowing. And there are strong laws and regulations around borrowing. So the DMO doesn't on its own determine what to borrow. Those are prescribed for us legally between the Executive and the National Assembly. So if you want to know the DMO's borrowing activities, if you check the annual budgets or some other special approvals, you will know it. So the point I'm making is that please be assured that borrowings are properly regulated. And in today's case, the green bond that we are planning to issue is actually part of the new domestic borrowing in the 2017 Appropriation Act. Okay, so as an institution, the DMO has done all the borrowing to fund the budget, but this amount was reserved because we knew the green bond for that amount was going to be issued. So it has been approved, and the projects to which the proceeds will be applied are also included in the budget. So it's like funding the, looking at 2 sides of the budget of the government. And so please be assured that what we're doing has been pre-approved. Once the budget was approved, that has been pre-approved. So that's as far as this goes. Some of you may have read some things in the press recently. We obviously have indicated our interest, our plans in terms of managing the public debt between external and domestic borrowing. So we did access the market last month successfully and raised $3 billion US. 2.5 billion of that was to fund the deficit in the Appropriation Act. Remember, like I said, there's a provision for funding of the budget. So really, all of that money is going to government to fund various projects. And you would have heard the Honorable Minister, I think sometime this week, say 750 billion is going to be released for capital projects. Okay, so remaining 500 billion US dollar, million US dollars was to refinance some domestic borrowing. So for those of you who are very conversant with the financial markets, you would know that early this week, the DMO issued a statement saying it would not redeem any of the treasury bills that mature this month. So if we hadn't done that borrowing, we would have had to do the automatic rollovers that we usually do. Okay, so, but we are redeeming the entire 198 billion naira. And our expectation is that the market will use those monies that are released to them. We're paying them back using the 500 million US dollars we got. We hope they'll use those proceeds to lend to the private sector and probably develop the corporate bonds. My brother behind, he knows for a long time, Himeme of Pencom, how hard we had been working towards developing that segment of the market. So our hope is that as the government pulls out a bit from the domestic market or becomes less active compared to previously, that other segments of the market would improve to support the private sector development.
Rachel, Patience Oniha, the Director General at the Debt Management Office. And we're talking about this setting new standards there for quality products in Nigeria. That's the conversation after the break. We'll be back in 2 minutes.